Hello and welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch a selected episode, comment along, throw in facts and observations, and try to guess what my special guest's favourite things about the episode might be.
Hi there, Toby, and hi everyone. My name is Jess Jurkovic. I'm a jazz pianist, arranger, composer in New York City. And most recently, in the last 4 years, I've been doing a YouTube project called the Dudley Simpson is Doctor Who Project, where I transcribe my favorite bits of Dudley Simpson music and create a solo piano arrangement of those pieces. I'm choosing Fury from the Deep.
Well, welcome. It's cold outside, but this is a story with some kind of atmosphere. It's being recorded, this podcast, on a cold winter night, chilly winter night. And it is just me, Toby Hadoke, hello, here with my dog Bernard, who's on the sofa with me. I don't know if he knows that this is one of the scariest Doctor Who stories by repute. And I think this is also one of the shortest episodes. Episode 3 of Fury from the Deep. I may be imagining that. You've heard Jess Jurkovic introduce it slightly. He is the special guest. He is only going to choose one musical thing, even though he is a maestro. He is a wizard of the Ivory Keys. Will this be the episode in which he does that? So, let us press play on episode 3 of the missing Doctor Who classic, Fury from the Deep. And it's made that really annoying noise on the menu go away. So I am watching on a big projector this reconstruction that I have not ever seen before. When this came out on DVD/Blu-ray, I watched the animation. So I save these recreations for this purpose. I do like the reconstructions, and I think they're a sort of closer way of getting the experience of the show, not being distracted by the animations. Now, when I had it on a cassette, it's sort of, you had to turn the cassette over in it, and it was slightly out of sync. But I remember whoever had done it, because I think they'd all been edited together, to sometimes lose the cliffhangers. I think the cliffhanger on the audio copy I had came in when, I think it's the chief says, "Mr. Robson, that noise from the impeller, it started again." And they went, "Woo!" Whereas actually that was actually the start of the recap. So somebody had slightly misplaced it, because of course the cliffhanger is, it's down there in the darkness in the pipeline, which Jess nearly chose last time, as did I. And neither of us did, because we chose Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill. But it's a sign that it's a story of curious riches, that they're both quite unusual things that were vying for the top spot there. I mean, a cliffhanger is not unusual in Doctor Who, but one where somebody just says something ominous most definitely is. I do buy the Harrises as a couple who love each other, and they are slightly soppy, but I think it kind of needs that for them to work as this, the nice people that we're rooting for, especially as the person who is their antagonist, Chief Robson. It seems to be in a permanent state of grumpiness. You need somebody, and Roy Spencer has that very sort of light, precise diction. Did I say this? He said, I don't know if he said it to me, but he said to somebody, because he'd worked with Derek Goodwin, the director of Invisible Enemy. I think he tried out for the voice of K9, Roy Spencer, and he has that very clear, precise, very RP diction that you could see why they would go, yeah, that's the kind of voice we need for this, this clipped, information machine. So he was very nearly a part of, a legendary part of Doctor Who. He's still a sort of legendary part of Doctor Who. He's in Fury from the Deep. A story that I remember for a while was the sort of a story that nobody sort of named as a classic, and yet always appeared, quite near the top of, best stories ever, and in polls I was always quite pleased to see it sort of nestling in, number 22 or 27 in all-time greats. This was, when classic, it was just Classic Who. And I quite like that because it never had the pressure of being one of those ones that was always in the top 10. So nobody ever thought it was fashionable to go, yeah, I'm the one who hates the Web of Fear or whatever. And I don't know why I've just been mean about somebody I've just made up there, because I was always, I think the Tomb of the Cybermen's overrated. So I'm a hypocrite. It just depends on which story it is you're doing it to, isn't it? But Fury always seems to sort of manage to escape that because nobody knew it well enough. And then those that did know it sort of went, well, I love it. And those that didn't really know it but hoped it was good, like me, sort of probably boosted its score. I don't know where it sort of sits now. Because it is. I think within the position of the season, it does have quite a lot of similarities to what's gone before, but watched in isolation, and also actually within the context of season 5, it's still quite unusual, as we'll see. Nobody dies, and because Pemberton's not written any Doctor Who before. It's got a curiously novel approach in the way that it does some classic sort of Who staples. And I definitely believe the sort of base setup, the relationships between all of these people. And I think Victor Madden is excellent as Robson, doing a very difficult job. And he's got, look at that, he's got a brilliant, that sort of slightly closed side of one mouth and the jutting chin. He's got a fantastic face as an actor, and I love his hair with its streaks of grey. He was a very interesting man. He's famous, isn't he? He's in the famous outtake of Dixon of Dock Green, where it's him and Alan Tilvern, who is the guy from Planet of the Giants, and what's his face in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, who Muldoon, isn't it? Who Victor Madden has to say, they're down at Dock Green Nick, and he keeps saying Dick Green Dock and all of that. Dock Green Dick, and at the end he rather plaintively says, "Can't I just say to Nick?" And that, I think that outtake exists, but the episode itself doesn't. And I remember that was shown on Auntie's Bloomers by Terry Wogan, and he did quite a nice line afterwards saying, after this, Victor founded a school for teaching people, to improve their public speaking, and judging by his performance there, they'll never be out of business. And Victor Madden was quite an entrepreneur. He invented a tape cassette dog, whatever that is. I've got all his blurb because I wrote to him back and forth a couple of times in the 90s, and the results of that were printed as an interview in Doctor Who magazine after Victor's passing, actually. He died, and again, you think when I was writing to him, I was thinking I was writing to this really old actor, and I was amazed that some of these people were still going and still going strong, and Victor he was still acting. But he was only he was actually 66 when he died. My God, that's actually only 17 years older than I am now. That's nothing. But at the time, it was like, he was this, because he'd been a well-known face in the 50s and 60s, thought of him as ancient, but he wasn't at all. Was John Abernethy was still. In fact, when I was looking around at Fury from the Deep in the late 80s, early 90s, all of these guys were pretty much still in the business, except I think Graham Lehman, who died in the 80s, but pretty much everybody else. Hubert Rees was still about. He's in a great episode of Bergerac, the one with Charles Gray. John Abernethy was Herne the Hunter in Robin of Sherwood, and I was delighted to see cropped up in The Godfather Part 3. Anyone who's experienced my one-man show, Must Take My Doctor Who Scarf, will know that I have this special bond with John Abernethy, to the extent that his son came to see my one-man show when it was on in Westcliff-upon-Sea, but only because I was going through the technical stuff with the guy, and there are various cues, so he's got a sort of breakdown of the show, and there's a bit where it says John Abineri, and he said, "Oh, was he an actor?" And I said, "Yeah, it's just it'll make sense within the context of the show." He said, "No, his son lives down the road. He does stuff at this theatre." And I went, "Call him, get him here." And we'd sold out, so he sat in the booth. In the sound and lighting booth, and watched this show that has lots of lovely references to his dad being my favourite actor as a kid. And then I dated his niece when I met her. I met this girl at university in conversation. Doctor Who came up, and she said, "Oh, my uncle was in Doctor Who," and it could have been anyone, John Abineri. And I was like, "I know everything about him." So he sort of followed me around. So yeah, but yeah, Victor Madden was a really interesting guy who. He taught people how to improve their public speaking. I love this. I hope this was pulled off well. The seaweed in the tank, in the TARDIS. I also sort of forget about this part of the story where everyone's yelling at each other because that's all they do in the gas station, whatever it's called. Whilst the Dr. Jamie and Zoe sort of go back to the TARDIS, don't they? And look up the seaweed creature in ancient texts, which I kind of like. That's very sort of Nigel Neely. Anything that means that our sort of alien of the week somehow ties into our mythology or folklore, I always find rather potent, because anything embedded in the past is automatically spookier. I never really think of it as an aspect of this story. You think of this story as, the scary one with the gas. It makes you think of, modern modern inventions, our need for gas, our reliance on a fossil fuel. So you think of it as something that permeates the everyday. I always think of a gas oven when I think of Fury from the Deep. There isn't one here. He does this very well, and "they're getting at me," he says, is the ultimate paranoid's refrain. And my brothers always I was quite a persecuted child. I still have a bit of a persecution complex. It's only because I want approval. And my brothers used to say, "Oh no, you're not paranoid, Toby. Everyone's just getting at you." And so that line about "they're getting at me" it seemed to resonate with me, because it was what my brothers accused me of, thinking that everybody was always getting at me. And I find that evocation of paranoia rather believable. It's slightly more, to me, sort of mundane and everyday than man cracks under the strain because he can't deal with because unlike Jarvis Bennett in The Wheel in Space, who's one of the most ludicrous characters in the whole of Doctor Who, this to me seems to be born of sort of more everyday strain. It's not, Robson's a problem before he's even having to accept or confronted with the idea of aliens. He's just a bit of a stubborn git. That does mean he's potentially a bit one note, because he starts at annoyance level 10 and hasn't really got anywhere else to go. He's annoyed before people start getting eaten by seaweed and breathing out gas. He's just annoyed he might have to turn something off. Just might have to turn a tap off, and he's furious. God, imagine what malevolent seaweed's going to do with him. But I think Madden does it well. And yeah, the whole setup I think of as quite modern. It is, it's a good idea for a Doctor Who to go, Letty on the loo and Tooting Beck to go, seaweed in your gas pipes. But I do like that attempt within the TARDIS, looking through those ancient books, that this malevolent seaweed might be something from ancient times, and anything that is that haunts ancient mariners, as it were, brings with it a certain resonance that, as I say, I don't really associate with this story, but I think it benefits from. But then the malevolent seaweed in the TARDIS, I'm hoping that's the seaweed's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think if it's plastic seaweed, it might be a bit too stiff to be sort of creepy, but if it's too limp, but look at that, because of course they have this seething mass of bubbling foam, and within that you've got visual effects man Peter Day with this kind of long tendrils, and if it doesn't look like a man waggling two long tendrils about, whilst shuffling about like a bloke. If it looks like some of these pictures suggest a kind of formless, shapeless thing thrashing about, I think it could be one of the most effective Doctor Who creatures ever. And looking at the way that Hugh David shot the Oak and Quill stuff, and looking at some of those pictures, and as I say, that one picture that we had that actually turned out to be a visual effects shot with this sort of foam and this sort of this malevolent surf wave sort of thing, cascading foam in its wake, but having a sort of, shapeless malevolence to it. And yet recognizably that creepy clammy stuff on the beach. That could be the ultimate combination to be a really, really effective Doctor Who monster. Or it could be a man shuffling about in bubble bath. Or it could be somewhere between the two, and I suspect there'll be some shots that if we could watch them over and over again, which I certainly would, but some would work and some would be less effective. That's what happens when you roll the dice when you're making a Doctor Who. But there's also this idea that it's lurking, in the ventilation shafts. Ventilation shafts, is often a funny Doctor Who staple where there are these great big corridors people can crawl around bases in. But actually here, they're an entrance into our sanctum. Robson had gone to shut himself into his room in order to escape the noise in his head, essentially, and wakes up to the nightmare of this stuff, feeding its way into his inner sanctum via the air conditioning, which is very creepy. Anything that can pervert the everyday and tap into our primal fears of something, entering, our home, or the place, the walls that we've built around us is great for Doctor Who. And this creature is unlike a Yeti trying to bang the doors down, or Cybermen smashing through things. This Ice Warriors trying to get in. They're all similarly shaped creatures. At least the weed creature here, can slither under doors and through grills and all of that, which I think makes it rather creepy. And so Van Lutyens is here, taking control. The mighty John Abineri, who rather delightfully, in the Radio Times, it was the first Radio Times I went to look at when I was in Birmingham Library, and I just went to look through old Radio Times. That was a day out when I was a boy, and flicking through and the first one I went to was the Radio Times entries for Fury from the Deep, and I was delighted because for episode 2 there was a picture of Victor Madden as Robson, and it's a picture that I don't think survives anywhere else. In fact, there are no pictures that aren't telesnaps of the speaking guest cast. There's a few of the extras dressed as technicians when some of the foam's bursting out and stuff like that, but I don't think there are any pictures of the human guest cast that aren't telesnaps. So thank goodness for John Cura. And they didn't exist when I was at or we didn't know they existed when I was in the Birmingham Library looking at the Radio Times. So we didn't know what any of these characters looked like, apart from the fact that we knew the actors because they were largely still about. But then for episode 4, because, and I noticed then, and I've mentioned my crustness when the releases get these wrong. This is not Doctor Who. It's not starring Patrick Troughton, Fraser Hines, and Deborah Watling. It is not. It is Doctor Who starring Patrick Troughton with Victor Madden and Fraser Hines, Deborah Watling. The guest stars get higher billing than the companions, and part of me, was like, well, of course, John Abineri is not going to get it because this is quite early in his career, and he was always one of those sort of doughty character actors like Bernard Kay and David Collings, who probably mean more to us as watchers of this sort of stuff because they crop it up in it a lot than a name, a revered name in the industry. Whereas Victor Madden's a film actor, and recognisable within the industry and to people at home. This lovely telesnap they keep using of Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill. Bill Burridge has such a creepy face. But for episode 3, it's suddenly, and it was almost like I'd willed it into being. I did episode 1, episode 2 is the picture of Victor Madden. I was like, I like the way that they do this. They put the guest cast first. As first inkling that I had that they did such a thing in the 60s. And then you get to episode 3 and it's suddenly starring Patrick Troughton with Victor Madden, John Abernethy, and Fraser Hines, Deborah Watling. So I'd willed John Abernethy's guest billing into being for this episode 3. Oh, and poor old Harris has lost Maggie. It's the female character being most susceptible is, I suppose, a bit of a 60s thing, but it does create, it means that Harris's eye isn't quite on the ball because he's worried about his wife, and we like her. She's a nice character. Here she is, and she's covered in the weed. And again, we've got some clips later of Robson with the weed sticking out of his sleeves, and it looks a little bit stiff. But then again, if it was too soggy, it would just dangle down. So it's a difficult one. What you really need is malleable weed writhing about, which is how you do it now, a bit like Colony Sarf or whatever, but you'd have the weed sort of moving around, and you can't do that with this. So what you do is you get good at that. But this shooting on the beach, this sort of desolate beach that we have, and I know that that Hugh David said this cliffhanger was difficult to do because the water was quite shallow, and in the end, he had to make she'd walk out, and then she had to get down on her knees, and then she had to sort of lower herself down rather than walk impassively into the sea, which would have been ideal. And we don't know how that's worked, whether he cuts back to Robson, whether he changes that. We don't know how it's done, but hopefully it was as arresting an image as it feels like it is to me, because the rest of that stuff on film looks beautifully shot. I love having Robson in the foreground to the side of the picture and her receding smaller into the distance, and you have this cold, dark, threatening unknown of the sea on this sort of desolate, chilly beach. I think it's one of those cliffhangers where there's no peril to our regulars or anything like that. No particular story beat. Basically, Maggie's just going to go and join wherever the seaweed people are having their coral party or whatever it is they're doing. But in terms of the story, it's just an arresting image to sort of mark a story beat. Robson is now under control. Maggie is, Harris ain't going to find his wife anytime soon. And what a wonderful image that is, and again a slightly off kilter cliffhanger, which means that I like it because I've seen a lot of Doctor Who cliffhangers. So if it's one of the Doctor in peril, it needs to be a really good one. If it's one where the plot spins on an axis, it needs to be very artfully done. And then you get these ones which is just a moment that just makes you go, whoa. Last week it was John Abernethy just being spooky. It's down there in the darkness. And this time it's Maggie Harris walking impassively into the sea. And I love it for that. And in fact, because there's otherwise just quite a lot of arguing in the base between fine character actors, I am going to choose the cliffhanger. And I love that piece of music as well. I wonder if Jess might choose it. I think that desolate, people meeting on the beach sort of mood music that they have there is really sort of, it's gentle, but it's a gentle discordancy, but that makes it sort of haunting and slightly creepy. But that adds to the impact of what is my favourite thing of the episode, which is the cliffhanger. Maggie Harris walking impassively into the sea. That was a short episode. I think it's only about 20 odd minutes long. Well, they're all 20 odd minutes long. But as I'm recording, I'm on 23 minutes, and I did a bit of guff beforehand, and I did plenty of guff since. It's the guff that you come for. So, Fury from the Deep has been watched with me by the lovely Jess Jurkovic. And he is going to tell me now what his favourite thing of episode 3 is.
Right, on to episode 3. We get several weed attacks, including the overrunning of the Harris's home, which I feel particularly bad about because although I don't cook, I love the Harris's kitchen. I would learn to cook if I had that kitchen. The other attack is on Robson in his quarters, where it appears to have succeeded in taking him over. This in contrast to an earlier scene where he basically loses it and can't keep up with reality. Good thing he's in charge. So all these very exciting things. My favorite in episode 3 is partially the cliffhanger where Robson on the beach watches Maggie Harris walk into the sea. We hear the heartbeat, thumping sound. It's absolutely mesmerizing to think of this happening, wondering, has she just committed suicide? I mean, the whole thing is extremely frightening. And what does it for me is the music. This is my music choice. When I started doing the project, I actually started with a couple of recordings that existed. The Master's theme, The Fish People from the Underwater Menace. The third transcription I did was this music, this hypnotic, throbbing, single note melody, which I referred to as a siren song because it's holding sway over them. It's like the manifestation of the weed's influence over Maggie and Robson. I was originally so intrigued by this hypnotic melody with the swelling oscillators underneath and this melody which was beautiful yet extremely angular. Dee da dee ya, dee ya dee ya. It's like, where did you come up with that? It's beautiful, but you wouldn't think so just listening to some of the ideas. But how Simpson makes that melody, well, I had to transcribe it, and I did. It's episode 3 of the project if you get a chance to look at it. But that's my choice of favorites for episode 3. The cliffhanger itself is dynamite, but what really sells it for me is Simpson's pitch perfect music.
Oh, I mean, I chose the cliffhanger, but I did say this might be the bit where he chooses the music. So I hope you can find it in whoever's keeping score, which I think is precisely nobody in the world. Might allow me a little bit of pointage for being in the same sort of ballpark. I was, I'd put my sun lounger on the same part of the beach as Jess there, even if we weren't swimming in the same part of the sea. But that was a nice little lesson on why the music works, isn't it? And it is a fantastic piece of music. I would love to see Fury from the Deep. I think you can't really know what a story is like unless you at least have some idea of how it is rendered visually. And we've got those tantalizing clips, and the clips do work in its favor, I would say. But then again, I mean, on the video version of Jess's contribution, the reason the reason for the pause when he describes the kitchen is explained by the fact that he puts up a picture of it, and it is quite a thing. It is as sort of 60s veering into 70s as you can get. There's not a part of that kitchen furniture that hasn't got a pattern on it. And I mean, it's almost like sort of somebody's done a sort of Rorschach print out of malevolent seaweed and turned it into Formica kitchen coverings. But certainly you could put a bit of seaweed on the kitchen top and it would easily meld into the rather garish pattern the Harrises have chosen. And they seem like such an ordinary couple. Maybe things go on behind closed doors that are as sort of indulgent and over the top as their choice of kitchen decor. Who knows? Maybe the pampas grass outside has been obscured by foam, and if you know what that's a reference to, you're very naughty. And if you don't, it wasn't a good day when I found out, so you don't need to go there. Anyway, let's not get into that. So look, before I throw my car keys into that hat, it's time for me to go. This will be a short episode, but that's not my fault. It's Doctor Who's fault for Fury from the Deep, episode 3 being one of Doctor Who's shortest installments. Did I get a point for that? Because actually this one might end up being quite close, mightn't it? Ooh, well, it's up to you, but I hope you give me a little bit of a point for that, because if you don't, well, then I'll think you're getting at me. Well, thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special musical guest is Jess Jurkovic, who can be found on Twitter at Jess Jurkovic, and his website is jessjurkovic.com. I'm grateful to him and to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Luke Atkins, Peter Adamson, John Arnold, Kevin Ashleford, James Bell, David Bickley, Will Brooks, Rick Byatt, Gary Byrne, Robin Bland, Alex Kafajoglu, Paul Carnahan, Paul Carrington, Andy Case, John Curley, Mark Dakin, John Elledge, Gary Gillett, Paul Goodridge, James Gould, Lisa C. Greco, David Green, Fraser Gregory, Paul Gregory, Dave Hoskin, Richie Howarth, Andrew Jordan, Christopher Joyce, Ashley Knight, Clive Lewis, Guy Lambert, James Lark, Gavin McLean, David Matthewman, and Jason Mayo. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. And I was right. That episode of Fury from the Deep is 20 minutes and 29 seconds long. So not even 20 and a half minutes. Not quite. So that is a very, very short episode. So you get less of me for your... You get less banging on for your buck. But, you know, thank heavens for small mercies. If you would like to be a patron, one of the advantages of that is that you get your name read out in the closing credits, like what I have just done with those names there. Isn't that exciting? I mean, if you're not excited, there is more. You get early releases, you get bonus material, and you get various things as you go up the patron level, but most things are available at £3 per month, which is the lowest tier. £3 per month gets you all of the essential stuff. And that is if you go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. You can go up to 5, 10, 20, 50, a million. You can give me £1 million if you want. But as I say, most things you get for £3. Patreon.com/Toby Hadoke to be ahead of the crowd with the releases. You can also go to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. There are no bonuses there, no early releases, no exclusive access or any of those things. It's just a way of sort of tipping me, buying me a coffee, a metaphorical one, although I might sometimes use it to buy an actual coffee. Although, to let you into a secret, I probably have about 2 coffees a year. I have to be in the absolute mood. I blame when I was at university, I did my dissertation on Quatermass. I did 2 dissertations. My second one was on Dennis Potter. I have 2 degrees. Neither of them neither of them have in any way equipped me for any of the jobs that I do. But I ate a lot of Pro Plus and drank a lot of black coffee because I thought that's what you did. I had images of you stay up all night just drinking black coffee, like people do when they're investigating crimes or the supernatural or great big government conspiracies. I was writing about television that I liked. And the combination of black coffee and Pro Plus percolated within my intestinal system and played havoc with it. And now I think in fact it's played so much havoc with it, my computer has just leapt off my lap. Played so much havoc with my system that it remembers, and so I have to really be in the mood. And I will occasionally. I always used to drink black coffee, but now I will occasionally have a cappuccino. I didn't used to take sugar either, but I don't take sugar in my tea, but I will have a cappuccino with a little bit of sugar in it every now and again, maybe, as I say, almost twice a year, and I have to be in the right mood, and then my constitution can just about take it. So it's more likely to be there's a very long-winded way of saying it's more likely to be a metaphorical coffee. At ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. Which is an alternative to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, which is a commitment. And I understand that both of those things might not be ideal in the current climate. I mean, the climate being it's getting really cold and utility bills are going right up. So, but you know what you can do that costs you nothing and will provide some warmth, if only to my cockles, and that is to go onto iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, everywhere you can, really, and give these, Toby Hadoke's Time Travels, 5 stars and perhaps a few lines of review saying what you like about them to point people in the direction of these labours of mine. And if you can spread the word on cyberspace, say nice things online, it just really helps. And I know some of you have been already, and I'm very, very grateful. I'm on Twitter at Toby Hadoke. These have their own feed at Hadoke Podcasts. So, so I hope everybody's okay out there. The winter night, as I record this, the winter nights are creeping in. See, that's one of the advantages of being a patron. The weather reports are actually apposite to the time in which they are released. As if you're a non-patron, you'll probably be getting this. Well, I'm recording this in October 2022, so you'll probably be getting it in about March 23 when the winter nights have abated and there's lovely light dusky evenings again, and your spring flowers are just about to burst. Here it's a barren winter. It's almost as chilly as the beach on Fury from the Deep, and as cold as the dark dank ocean that has within it the malevolent seaweed, the colony of devils. I hope you're enjoying Fury from the Deep. It's a funny one, isn't it? It's almost an anomalous story in the whole pantheon of Doctor Who, and yet one that's so similar to much that surrounds it. I think it's a congruence of all sorts of things, really. In terms of that, it's one of the few. What is it now? Only four missing, wholly missing Troughtons, Power, Highlanders, Macra, Fury. Is that it? Gosh, it was a very different story when I was a boy. Anyway, this is all stuff. The next episode's 24 and a bit minutes long, so I'm going to need to find things to say because I can't go. They're arguing about the gas again. And here are some more facts about John Abernethy. I have more. Anyway, wishing you well, and thanks for staying to the bitter, bitter end, which is what this is. And but Chief. Yeah, I bet when you walk into that sea, you get a bitter end. Anyway, let's not get into that. Ta-ta.